Okay, hi everyone. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to this week's session of Cafe Ole at Nefesh B'Nefesh. My name is Jay Rosen. I am a volunteer here with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I actually made Aliyah with them myself um, almost 15 years ago. It'll actually be coming up in a few weeks. And here at Cafe Ole, we go through the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to survive. It's not necessarily the Hebrew you learned in day school or Sunday school, or even here in Israel in Ulpan. It's really meant to be you as Olim by choice. It's a term I like. The Hebrew that I knew I was lacking when I made Aliyah, but had to learn quickly, and to give you one less roadblock to cover to get around. So we go over everyday things, right? Paying bills, grocery shopping, following the news, everyday things that are part of your life wherever you're from in the world, certainly going to be a part of your life here. Let's make it a little bit easier for you. Let's also make this as user focused as possible. So we have a lot of people on this call every week. It's usually a much more intro level, so it's a bit more frontal for those of you who haven't participated in the past. But we want to make this as user friendly as possible. So if you have questions, if you have requests for topics for us to cover that are of universal interest, please write them in the chat window here or contact Nefesh B'Nefesh directly. We'll be more than happy to create a lesson out of it. For those of you who are new or have forgotten from weeks past, the format of tonight. So I'm about to share with you tonight's lesson in the form of a spreadsheet, but we'll go over all of it together. If you have questions while on the call of things I'm going over in this specific lesson, please write it in the Q&A section. If you look at the Zoom menu bar, you'll see Q&A. Please write questions specific to tonight's session there. If you have questions about anything else, if you have comments or critiques about me or about this or anything else, please write that in the chat function. There's a lot of you on this call. We're just about at 100 participants here, and there's only one of me. So it helps me get through teaching, but also facilitate your questions, answering your questions. If you keep them reserved to the ones about this session in the Q&A, everything else, the chat. Thanks in advance. Also, you'll get a recording of this session on Nefesh B'Nefesh's YouTube channel in the next 1 to 2 days. So if you want to catch up, if you have to drop out in the middle of the class, or you want to go back and review, you didn't have time to screenshot or write down the words that we went through today, or there was something you want to go over, you'll be able to watch it and all previous sessions on Nefesh B'Nefesh's YouTube channel. Just go on to youtube.com, type in Nefesh B'Nefesh, or even type in Cafe Ole, and you'll find all of our sessions here. Okay, so with that, we are going to do what I think is a pretty cool session for two reasons. One is it was a request that we go over this specific topic, but also because I am, as you see, those of you who are used to joining us, I'm in a different location. I'm actually in Nefesh B'Nefesh's Tel Aviv office, which functions also as a shared workspace. So they're having tonight actually a brainstorming session about the future of this place. This is where Cafe Ole got started, pre-pandemic meeting in person. We're now online. So I'm participating in that as well as here. So I need to juggle a little bit, but we're going to get through our class, which is a user is requested by you participants and appropriate for me needing to do two things, which is abbreviations, right? Abbreviations, acronyms, contractions, all of those things. We've talked about them before in passing. Today, we're going to go into a little bit more of how do you create them, or at the very least, how do you identify abbreviations, acronyms in Hebrew? How do you even pronounce them, if at all? And how you can generate some on your own. So first off, I'm going to put in the chat window, in the chat box, a really cool website that all of you can follow along with, which is called kitsur.co.il. I'm sharing it there now. Go look at it at your leisure. Kitsur or kitsur means a contraction or a shortening of something. It comes from the verb likatser, which means to cut or to shorten. Katsar or katsar, depending on how you say the letter resh, means short. And Kitsul is basically a website. Let me see if I can show it to you on the screen right now. It's a really cool website. right? Kitzurim ve'roshei tevot beivrit. What this means is kitzurim, I just said, are contractions or abbreviations. Roshei tevot or roshei tevot is our next really important word here. That is what we're talking about tonight, which are abbreviations and acronyms. Okay, roshei tevot at the beginning. This you can type in any contraction, any abbreviation, any acronym you come across in Hebrew in the search button, press chapes, which means search, and it'll give you what the full word is, the full abbreviation, the full expression that's being abbreviated. And here at the bottom, you see in all these letters are all the different categories of different contractions, abbreviations, and so forth that you can find on. We're going to go through some of these as well and understanding how this came about. But this is a really great resource for those of you who I didn't get to a specific one that you have a question about tonight, or you want to go over any of them, or you just come across some. Just plug it in here on this website, kitzur.co.il, and you'll be able to follow along. So with that, let me share my screen with today's lesson. Just one second. Let me do that again. Make sure I have it there. Okay, and share screen. Okay, let me just make sure. Sorry, I just saw that someone was saying that they didn't see it. I see that you didn't see it. Okay, just one second, folks. Now you should be able to see it. Okay, so let me share my screen with you and we'll go over today. So we're actually going to start, as I share my screen, with a word you probably didn't even know was a contraction. And this is to make the point of how pervasive, how common abbreviations are in Hebrew for a couple reasons. Number one, Hebrew, as we've talked about, is very conservative in the amount of words it has, right? It's not English. There aren't an infinite amount of words. There's new words always being created, but they're often created out of existing words or, as we're going to see today, out of abbreviations. But there isn't this huge repository of words in Hebrew. So we're already very conservative with the amount of words we have. Number one. And number two, as we talked about before, Hebrew, like all Semitic languages, loves to keep things short. It's not just conservative and short in the amount of words we have, it's the amount of syllables words have and how many words we put together, right? So Hebrew is not known for having long words, long in syllables and or letters. We just don't have them in Hebrew. So abbreviations help with that, right? It helps aid making words short in terms of the letters and syllables they have. And here's a great example. In the vast majority of languages in the world, especially in the West and here in the Middle East, there are two different ways we call the fruit orange. Either it comes from the South Asian root naranj, so we get Spanish naranja, we get naranj in several other languages, or we get derivations of the word portugal, because the Portuguese Empire was one of the very first empires to import the fruit from South Asia, where they're from, into Europe. So in Greek, in Turkish, in Arabic, it has that same name. It's called portakal, the fruit, the orange, the fruit, not the color. The fruit is called portakal because it comes from Portuguese. Hebrew is a notable exception, as you see here in row 2. Hebrew, what do we call it? Orange, tapuz. If you thought tapuz comes from the Bible, you'd be partially right. But the word itself, tapuz, is an abbreviation. It is an abbreviation for, as you see here on the right-hand side in row E, in column E, tapuach zahav. Tapuach is an apple. Zahav is gold. And so we have the word tapuach zahav. Now, it is found in the Bible. There's a quote from the book of Proverbs, from Mishlei, that talks about tapuche zahav. It's not talking about orange, the fruit. It's talking about apples, which have been grown in the Middle East for millennia. And so they took from that when they were reinvigorating the Hebrew language into a modern language in the early 20th century, they used that as the basis for our word that we have today for orange. Tapuach zahav became tapuz, right? So tapuz is actually an abbreviation. It's an acronym. It's an abbreviation, let's call it, right? It's not an acronym. for tapuach zahav. We don't call it tapuach zahav. We call it a tapuz. Tapuzim are multiple oranges, but this is just to show you how pervasive and common abbreviations are, so much so you've been using one all this time and you didn't know it. Before we jump into the major categories and some examples, we need to talk about two important pieces of punctuation in rows 3 and 4 here. As you see here, when we get into the words, you'll see at the top the columns, but I want to talk about these two grammatical things right now, and they have to do with punctuation. One, we've actually talked about these a lot, but I want to go through them together. One is an apostrophe. An apostrophe in Hebrew is called a geresh or geresh, as you see here in row 3. It's also known by its slang term, chupchik. Chupchik is like this. It's like something that flaps. Um, to put this in more context, there's a very, very, very famous comedic skit here in Israel from a comedy troupe called Hagashash HaChiver. If ever you want to get a grasp on Israeli culture and society and how slang evolved and how many of the jokes we have to this day in Hebrew were created, this is where you're going to look. These three guys who both wrote their own material and had very important authors in Israeli society write for them as well. One of their skits is making fun of radio shows, because remember, TV didn't exist for a long time here in Israel. They had a radio show, and the radio show, the whole skit was entitled "Beat the Expert," and there were about 5 or 6 different skits within this, like different radio programs. One of them is an expert on the Hebrew language. And this guy calls in asking for "Ech omrim hachupchik shel hakumkum?" What do you call the flap on an electric kettle? And instead of answering him, the guy who's the expert takes 10 minutes to correct every single part of his Hebrew. It's so pedantic. And it's so over the top that when he finally answers it, it gets even funnier because everyone's exasperated. It sounds actually rather vulgar the way he explains the answer for it. The answer, by the way, in proper Hebrew is zelbuvit. It's not the punchline, but it's a very funny skit to watch. Regardless, chupchik and chupchik shela kumkum have become an expression in Hebrew in modern Israel to be talking about being pedantic, right? Talking too much about the rules or grammar or things that people normally don't care about because they'll just use the word chupchik. They won't say geresh. You do need to know the word geresh for our next word, row 4. And this is a very important one. Both of these words are important in talking about abbreviations. Is girshaim. Geresh is 1 apostrophe. Girshaim are 2. We talked about this actually just last week. Ayim at the end of a word indicates a dual or a pair of something. It's a unique function actually to all Semitic languages. Instead of saying shnei grashim, which would be the way you would literally say 2 gereshes, is 2 apostrophes, we can simply say gilshaim, and that's it. And it's understood. We're talking about 2 apostrophes. These are very important for a reason. And that brings us to our very first word, which some of you probably know already, but explains something very important. Our very first word here in row 6 is Tanakh. Okay, Tanakh, those of you who don't know, is the Hebrew word for the Hebrew Bible. Okay, what other people would call the Old Testament, Jews, we just call the Bible. This is Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Tuvim. Each of those letters stands for the first letter of the 3 words it abbreviates, right? Tanakh, Taf for Torah, Nun for Nevi'im, Kaf for Ktuvim. Okay, so that brings us to an important lesson. First off, why do we use abbreviations? We use abbreviations oftentimes as a mnemonic device to remember something. How do we do something? How do we keep knowing? How do we keep remembering how to do something? Or remembering some sort of piece of information we need to know. Second are those gilshayim. In Hebrew, when we abbreviate or when we use an acronym, we take the first letters of the words, and then between the second to last and last letters of that new abbreviation, that new acronym, we add those gilshayim. Okay, there are no periods used in abbreviations and acronyms in Hebrew. Very important distinction between English and other languages. And we don't just use the letters. You have to show that this is an abbreviation. And so we use Gilshaim between the second to last and last letters to indicate, I know this is an abbreviation or an acronym. It's not just another word. Okay, so very important, Tanakh. If you didn't know that already, now you know how we say the Bible in Hebrew. Next word, very important for a couple reasons. First off, this follows the general rule of how we go about creating abbreviations and acronyms here in Hebrew. Okay, this one, Ayin Vav Gilshaim Dalet, row 7 here. As you see here is the acronym. The acronym that we're talking about for everything is going to be in column C. Column D is going to be an important one. As you see, there's an X next to this one. For some of these, they turn into a word, and for some of them, they don't. So Tanakh is a word. We create out of its acronym a word, Tanakh, and we say it. We don't say Taf Nun Chaf, we say Tanakh. Okay, so we treat it like it's a word. This next one, we don't. Okay, most of them we don't. Most of them, there's rules, and this is going to be one of those places where a lot of the rules are broken, and we're going to explain a bit in a minute. This is a classic one, and this follows the rules of how you create a new acronym or an abbreviation. Ain Vav Dalid stands for Oleh Din. Okay, the full word that we're talking about with each time is going to be in row E. You see here it's spelled out Oleh Din. On the far right is the transliteration for those of you who cannot read Hebrew. And on the far left in the blue is the translation. Orech din means a lawyer. Orech is someone who edits, is an editor, or reviews, or critiques, and din, judgment, but also law. Okay, so orech din is someone who interprets the law, who edits the law, as a lawyer. Okay, the standardized rule in Hebrew, which as I already, said that gets broken very often, is that when you have two words that are being mushed into one abbreviation, you take the first two letters of the first word and the first letter of the second word. Okay, so in this case, Olech Din, the first two letters are Ain Vav, and the first letter of the second word is Dalet. So in between those two words, we're going to put those Gilshaim. So Olech Din follows the rules. It also follows the rules in that as you see that big X under the pronounce as a word, this is when we don't turn into a word. Many of them, as we're going to see, don't get pronounced as a word. If you see Ein Vav Gilshaim Dalid in a document or in the newspaper, or it's written as a subtitle on the news or on TV, they're going to say Olech Din. They're not going to say Od. Od is a different word without the Gilshaim. Don't confuse the two. Okay, where you see the X, we do not pronounce it. Please don't try to be cute and pronounce it. No one will understand you. It's Olech Din. Okay. Here's another example of one that's very important to know. And this is one that we do pronounce. And it's pronounced for a specific reason. Sofash stands for Sof HaShavua. Here, it's not following the same rule because it's two words. So it should be the first two letters of the first word and the second letter of the first letter of the second word, right? So it should be Samech Vav for Sof, right? The first two letters of the first word. And it should be Shin, which is the first letter of the second word, Shavua. It's not. We say Sofash. And we say Sofash for a reason that we've talked about before. It's a little elusive, but it's an important one, is it just sounds better. Sofash is a much easier thing to say than what it's supposed to be, which is sosh, sush. It doesn't sound good. It's only sofash. You will only hear sofash. Sofash, as you see here on the right-hand side in row 8, stands for sof hashavua. It means the weekend. Sof is end. Hashavua is the week. The end of the week, the weekend. Okay, and you will hear people wish each other sofash na'im. Here's a case where it turns into a word. Sofash is understood all the time as sofa shavua. It cuts down on all those extra letters and it creates a new word, and we can say sofash na'im. This is an important thing, by the way. When you're here in Israel, you will notice not everyone on a Friday afternoon or even a Thursday night wish each other Shabbat Shalom for a couple reasons. First off, 20% of the population here is not Jewish. And even among Jews, there are many Jews who are traditional, secular, don't know who they're talking to, may not practice, may not be observant themselves. And so, based on where you are in the country, you will hear people either wish you Shabbat Shalom or Sofash Na'im, or sometimes both. Have a nice weekend or Shabbat Shalom. I personally say both because I don't know with whom I'm speaking and I don't want to place anything on anyone. But both of them are going to be understood to mean have a nice weekend, obviously with different contexts. Okay, so very important one. And the last one here is important. You probably know this one already. Row 9 is Tzahal. Tzahal stands for Tzva Hagana LeIsrael, the Israel Defense Forces. Tzava is army. Haganah is defense. Israel, Israel. Right? So just as we say IDF in Hebrew, right? We say Tzahal. And that shows a major difference between the two languages. In English, most of the time, we do not turn acronyms into words. We pronounce them letter by letter. In Hebrew, we often, when we do pronounce the acronym, because again, as we said, it doesn't always happen, we do pronounce that as a word. We'll never spell it out. We'll instead say tzahal. So by the way, if you have seen those IDF shirts or those mainly for tourists that have dots in between the letters that have tzadi, dalet, dot, hey, dot, lamed, dot, that's incorrect. You already know it's for tourists because it's incorrect Hebrew. An acronym will always have Gilshaim between the second to last and last letters. That's just how it runs, okay, without an exception. I put Sahal on here for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's again one that probably many of you know, but also because we talked about Hebrew being all about conserving the amount of letters and syllables that we use. Well, there's another entity and another source for a lot of these, both in Israel and in other places, which is the army. Armies worldwide will always condense words into shorter forms because if you're giving out an order or an instruction, you don't have as much time to give it out. So you need to be able to use acronyms and abbreviations to condense the amount of time that you have so that people get the order, they know what it needs to do, they don't have to explain it in full terms. So instead of every time saying, the Israel Defense Forces or Tzva Hagana Israel, and then whatever they did, you can just say Tzahal, and it's done, right? Much easier. Tzahal, two syllables versus Tzva Lahagana Yisrael, 9 syllables. Much quicker. You save all that time to be actually doing what you need to get done. Okay, so a little bit of background. Let's get into some major ones. I'm not going through there, as you see on that website that I sent in the chat box, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, and you're going to actually see a couple that have been recently created. We're only going to go through some of them today, and we're going to go through them rather fast. Again, because they exist out there, I want to just give you a taste of how pervasive these are and how many of them you probably know already. So let's get into some of these and then answer your questions. So starting here at row 11. Ein Chet He Gilshaim Tzadi stands for Acharei Hatzoraim, or afternoon. Okay, so I made this really easy for you. You can follow along today. You can screenshot. You can come back and watch this video on demand via YouTube. Anytime you see the X next to the Hebrew acronym, it means that it is not pronounced as a word. You will not hear people say achatz. It's just not a word. No one will understand you. When you see that, it's understood and it's spoken as acharei hatzoraim. Okay, very important there, but it's a word that's used quite often. Certainly in writing, you'll see this quite a lot. If you're writing to friends, for example, when you want to meet, you would write shalosh, and then the acronyms meaning shalosh p.m., 3 p.m. meaning 3 in the afternoon, 3 afternoon, right? That literally means achara tzoraim, afternoon. This one, many of you probably know who are more religiously observant, bet Gilshaim Hey. Bet Gilshaim Hey can either stand for Baruch Hashem or Bezrat Hashem. Both of them in modern Hebrew. Baruch Hashem means thank God, blessed is God, bless you God, however you want to pronounce that, however I want to translate it. Bezrat Hashem, with God's help. Okay, religiously observant people will not only say these often, they'll write them at the top of any document that they're writing. So that if you didn't ever recognize what that meant, now you know. Okay, but you'll also see it abbreviated and written out if it's a direct quote, for example, in the news of a politician using this or someone else being quoted, it'll say, it won't write out Baruch Hashem, it'll just write Bet Gilshaim Hey. An important one. We're gonna these are all in alphabetical order, but we're gonna jump around category wise. Ba'am. This is one that we do pronounce, as you see in column D. We do pronounce this. Ba'am stands for LLC if you're American, or limited if you're from else in the world, right? A limited company, a company that is anyone who's doing business here in Israel as a company rather than a freelancer is Ba'am, which is LLC. Limited, you're going to see this at the end of the formal names of company names. It stands for Be'eravun Mugbal, right? Just like it limited capacity, limited control, just like we say in English. The point though is when it's pronounced as a word, you see here in row D, in column D rather, excuse me, column D, we only pronounce it as that. You will never hear anyone talking about a company, blah, blah, blah company, like Golan Telecom, which is one of the cell phone companies here. They will never say Golan Telecom Be'eravun Mugbal. No one would say that. When you have the option to pronounce the acronym and by mainstream society it's pronounced, we'll pronounce it. Okay, so in this case, we say Ba'am. Okay, it is always going to be pronounced as its acronym. Here's another one that's more of a abbreviation than an acronym. Very important, and it's the reason why we started with talking about a geresh or a chupchik, is Gimel Bet Geresh or Gimel Bet Chupchik, whichever word you prefer. Gimel Bet Geresh is an abbreviation for Geveret. Okay, Geveret in modern Hebrew can mean either Ms. or Mrs., right? It doesn't necessarily equate with a woman's marital status. It's a polite way to address a woman, regardless of her marital status, and frankly, also regardless of age. Usually, it's an adult woman. You would not call a teenager gveret. That being said, it doesn't convey marital status, but it will be abbreviated as gimel bet geresh. Okay. Here's one that's an exception to the rule. Typically, when you have a abbreviation, as opposed to an acronym, you take the first letter or letters and then you follow with a geresh. This is one that doesn't do that. Doctor. Okay, doctor is oftentimes abbreviated as if it was an acronym. So you see this first version in column C, right? Daled Gilshaim Resh. You'll see that quite often. That's actually incorrect, but it's so commonly used that we just use it and it's perfectly understood and it's considered okay. It's not okay in a pedantic grammatical way, but just like with a lot of language issues, right? We talk about this a lot before. Languages evolve and things change and things that were once not acceptable are acceptable. Here's an example. Doctor should be abbreviated like it is on the left. Dalid Resh Chupchik or just Dalid Chupchik, but it's not. Oftentimes you'll see that, but more often you'll see Dalid Gilshaim Rish, and that means doctor. Okay, it's not in Hebrew. We have our own word for doctor, which is rofeh, a rofa for a female doctor, but you will often see someone's title as a doctor written as either of these. Here's another contribution that is actually slang. And I love this because, again, language evolves. Slang is an important indication of how a language is evolving. This comes from the slang expression chaval al hazman. Chaval al hazman can mean either what a waste of time. It literally means too bad about the time, but it translates to what a waste of time. But in slang, it also means something is awesome. Think of it like the very archaic slang in English, bad, right? Bad was so bad it became good. Same thing here. Chaval al azman, to call something chaval al azman in slang means that's actually a really good thing. And we take it even a farther step because chaval al hazman, to indicate in 5 syllables that something's wow, we can make it shorter. So we have row 16, chavlaz. You call something chavlaz, it's really good. It's awesome. It's amazing. Okay, when it's abbreviated, it's only going to mean something positive because you just don't have time. You're so enamored with what it is that you're describing as awesome, you just got to say it. It's chavlaz or chavlazi if you wanted to turn it into an adjective, which I often do. Okay. Chavlaz is a great one. You won't hear it necessarily except among teenagers and young professionals, but it's a good one to have. Chaval azman is a great expression, but chavlaz is even more, taking our lesson to its full extent. Here's another slang word. This one I get a little bit of flack with, but I think is important to teach as someone who lives here in Tel Aviv, is chubatim. Chubatim stands for, as you see here on the right-hand side in row 17, Chulon ubat Yam. It actually, my automatic vowel generator translated as Chulon uvat Yam, which is really funny because if you were going to be pedantic about vowels, you would say Chulon uvat Yam. We don't talk like that, right? We're talking about the city of Chulon, talking about the city of Bat Yam. Those of you who are Americans, particularly from the East Coast, you may have heard the expression bridge and tunnel crowd. This is the expression that New Yorkers use for people who are not from the island of Manhattan. They may be from Bronx to the Queens. They're usually from Long Island or Connecticut or Westchester or New Jersey. The point though is they have to take a bridge or tunnel to get into the city, and they define obviously the city as only Manhattan. Tel Aviv has its own version. We call it Chubatim. There's another version, but Chubatim means you're from Chulon or Bat Yam, meaning you're not actually from Tel Aviv. You're just coming in and visiting. You're out of town. It's a little derogatory towards those two cities, looking down upon them, just like the term bridge and tunnel is derogatory. You won't hear it outside of Tel Aviv, but it's a good one to have. And it's also, again, slang, very contemporary, using acronyms to make something even smaller. Row 18, here's one you've probably heard multiple times, you've seen multiple times. It comes up in the news, it comes up in the paperwork that you've had to do, or going up, certainly any travel you want to do is chul. Chul means chutz la'aretz. It stands for chutz la'aretz, which can simply be translated as abroad. But in specifically to Israel, it refers to anything outside of the land of Israel. Chul is already used in Jewish literature in talking about anything outside the land of Israel, as there are certain mitzvot, there are certain commandments that can and cannot be done there. Chul is used all the time, right? Israelis, we love to travel. We love to get out of the country and explore. Chul is a really important part of our lives as much as living here in Israel. So we use this one a lot. Recognize it, own it. You're going to hear this one a lot. And this one we do pronounce as chul. Okay, as you see here in column D. Let's move up for a few more. Row 19, chamshush. Chamshush is a great one. It comes from the army. As I said before, many of our acronyms come from the army. Army is a very important part of Israeli society. What we learn, the first jobs that many Israelis have. So keep that in mind about how formidable, not formidable, how forming the experiences for them. Life, whatever you want. Okay, chamshush. Chamshush, as you see here in column E, stands for Chamishi, Shishi, Vishabbat. Chamishi means fifth, but it's referring to Yom Chamishi, Thursday, Shishi, Yom Shishi, Friday, Ushabbat, Vishabbat, and Shabbat. Chamshush is a long weekend. It comes from a term in the military where you get a long pass for the weekend. You're not just off for Shishi or Shabbat or just Shabbat, you have Chamshush. You get a pass for Chamshush, you get an extra long weekend. Because remember, the weekend here is technically Friday and Saturday. In reality, it's really only Saturday. It's Friday, many people have to work or are doing errands. You're off for Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You're really happy. You get a long weekend. Chamshush is also used by civilians to talk about taking a long weekend somewhere, right? The city of Jerusalem, the municipality of Jerusalem used to have an event during the year that was called Chamshushalayim, a great play on the term, because everyone knew the term Chamshush and they knew Yerushalayim. They combined them two together, Chamshushalayim. And it was a series of events that took place on Chamshush, on Chamishi, Shishi, Shabbat. Very clever on their programming and marketing department. Here's an exception to the rule that we're going to talk about, and it's an important one, is Yud dash Mem. Yud dash Mem, and a Mem Sofit, the final Mem letter, stands for Jerusalem. This is an exception to the rule for a couple of reasons. One, it's one word. Second, we don't pronounce it. And third, it's the use of the dash. This predates many of the rules and many of the Hebrew grammar that has been standardized about how we create abbreviations and acronyms. But it took on, and so it exists to this day. When you see Yud dash Mem, know that it stands for Yerushalayim. It will always stand for Yerushalayim. And we'll pronounce it as such, the full name, not as another one. Let's get into a few more. Yud Chet Geresh stands for unit, Yechida. This is if you're buying something in the supermarket and it's telling you what the price is. Sometimes it'll tell you what the price is per Yechida, how much it is per unit, right? So if you're buying a watermelon, for example, right now it's summer, avatiach, very popular refreshment. If you're buying avatiach, you need to check if the price is if it says 3 shekel, is it yechida or 3 shekel kilo? If it's 3 shekel yechida, you just found an amazing deal because it means that regardless of the size of that watermelon, it's 3 shekel. Or if it says 3 shekel, 3 shekalim kilo, that means that it's 3 shekel per kilo. So if you buy if you buy a 7 kilo avatiach, a 7 kilo watermelon, multiplied by 3, it costs 21 shekel. Okay, so yechida is a very important one as thoughtful consumers here in Israel, what to look at prices. Here is a relatively new one. It started off as slang and has become mainstream, so much so it's been used now in the Knesset by lawmakers, by members of Knesset quite a bit, which is a very important development, progression in Israeli society, which is the Hebrew version of LGBT. And this one we do pronounce, we say lahatab. Lahatab stands for lesbit, homosexuali, trans, bisexuali. Just like the English, LGBT stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans. Same thing here in Hebrew. We say lahatab, spelled like this in row 22, indicating LGBT. Okay, an important one that's started out in the gay community here in Israel and has become mainstream. Metel. Here's one that's an abbreviation. Instead of writing metel every time, mem tet resh, we can just write mem apostrophe. Mem geresh, we understand it means meter. Here's an important one that you're going to see a lot, and this will change and fluctuate depending on what you're looking at and who's writing it and so forth, is how do you say milligram, right? Milligram, remember, we're in Israel, we're not in America. Those of you, my fellow Americans, get used to the metric system. That's not for this lesson, though. It is to understand what to read. And here's a great one, okay? Milligram. Milligram will either be shortened as mem Gilshaim Gimel or Mem Gimel Girish. This has to do a lot with just like how we write it in English, right? Milligram is abbreviated as mg. It's taking the two components of that Greek Latin hybridized word, the milli and the gram, and from that we create an abbreviation. It's doing the same thing in Hebrew because this is not a Hebrew word. We've adopted it into modern Hebrew, but it is not Hebrew. We're taking metric measurements, transliterating them into the Hebrew alphabet, and then creating an abbreviation just like other languages do. MG turns into Mem Gilshaim Gimel or Mem Gimel Gerish. Both of them are, you'll be seeing quite a lot, so that's why I include both of them here. And you will always pronounce it as milligram. You will not say, just like you do in English, you won't say Mem Gimel, you won't say anything else, it's always milligram. Same thing for our next one, Mem Gilshaim Mem. Now this one is important because this can actually mean a lot of things. This can stand for Memale Makom, which means someone who's filling in. It can mean Mifaked Machlaka, a division commander, but we're still talking about metric measurements. So I'm making it easier for you. I only put it as millimeter, right? So if you go to IKEA, aka IKEA, and you're looking for the measurements of something, and it has a number, and then it says mem gilshayim mem, know that it means millimeter, as we say in Hebrew, millimeter, millimeter. A very important one, if you're not used to this already, this is a very important word to know, not just as consumers. If you're going to be a small business, you need to know this word, or self-employed, is ma'am. Ma'am stands for Mas Erech Musaf. Mas, as we talked about last week, is tax, T-A-X. Erech is value. Musaf is added. So tax added value or value added tax, VAT is how we say this term in Hebrew is ma'am. Okay, ma'am is a very important one. You'll see this one quite a lot. This one, if you're avid consumers to the point that you shop quite a lot, you'll see this one on tags and might get confused about what the heck this means. Mem kuf gilshayim tet with a whole number after it. Mem kuf gilshayim tet stands for mispar katalogi, or a catalog number. Mispar is a number, catalog is a catalog. This is simply whatever the catalog number for that company is of that specific item, right? So if you're buying dishes at Fox Home and it says Makat 5,000, you're not paying 5,000 shekel. That's just their internal catalog number of what that item is for their own merchandising reasons. Okay, let's move on to some more. Next one, Nadlan. Nadlan is a very important one for those of you who are looking to buy property here in Israel or are looking to rent, or just in general, the word for real estate. Real estate in Hebrew is known as Nadlan. We only say Nadlan. We do not say its full non-abbreviated form, which you see here on the right-hand side in column E, which is Nichse de la Naide. Okay, first off, this is Aramaic. I know it's Aramaic because of the way it sounds. This is not modern Hebrew by any stretch of the imagination, but I can figure out what it means through modern Hebrew. Neches in modern Hebrew means property. Nechse means that it's multiple forms. Dilla has the same word as lo in there. So property that is not naide. Naide is the same as the modern Hebrew word nayad, which we've had before, which is mobile, right? So those of you who know French or other languages and they talk about real estate, they often say immobilier, or however you pronounce it in French or in other languages, immobile property, real estate. Okay, Nadlan is how we say real estate in Hebrew. It will be written as an acronym and it will be pronounced as Nadlan. It will not be, no one will ever talk to you as a renter, as an agent. No one will ever say "Nichse de la naide." Never. And if they do, they're being pedantic. That's a good word, by the way, pedantic. Okay, another metric unit here, centimeter, centimeter, samech gershayim mem, or samech mem geresh. Okay, either one you'll see as centimeter. Another important one for buying things, sachakol. Sachakol will always, almost always, I think 99% of the time, be abbreviated as samech he gilshayim kaf, and it stands for sachakol. This means the total sum. So if you're looking at a receipt that you get, or you ask for the cheshbon at a restaurant, at a misada, and it comes and you're looking for the total price, you're looking for where it says sachakol and then the amount next to it. This one we actually had the other week when we were looking at news items was Ayin Gilshaim Yud. Ayin Gilshaim Yud stands for by, or it stands for Al Yadei, which in Hebrew in English we can translate as by or at the hands of. Again, it may sound to you that we're over shortening things. But think about it in terms of newspapers, right? A newspaper has to conserve the amount of space it has for the print, for the text, to make sure it gets in as much as possible, and also that ad space, that precious ad space. So in news in particular, you're going to find a lot of abbreviations. This is one of them. Ein Gilshaim Yud stands for at the hands of, it stands for Al Yadei, which means in Hebrew, in English, by or at the hands of. A very important one. And you're going to say al yadeh. When you see this, you're going to know that it stands for al yadeh. So if you're saying the sentence out loud or if you're reciting the news or whatever, you're going to say al yadeh, even if it's written as ayin yud yud, ayin gilshaim yud. Another metric measurement, kilogram, kuf gilshaim galed gimel, or written simply as kilo, just like we do in English, Kilo. We'll do the transliteration into Hebrew. Okay, so kilogram. Kilometer, another one. This one will usually almost always be abbreviated as kuf gilshaim mem. And with kilometer comes kamash. This one we do pronounce kamash. Kamash stands for kilometer l'sha'a. This is kph, right? So if you are on the road and you want to see on a highway what is the speed limit, you'll see a sign. It's usually a round, it's a circle with a red border, and it'll say in the middle 50 or 60 or 40. That is 40 or 50 or 60 kamash. Okay, how many miles per hour you can travel as at the speed limit. A few more, and then I want to get to some of your questions that you have here. Resh Gilshaim Hey is coming up very soon, in just a month, which is amazing. Rosh Hashanah. Another one you probably know already, Rambam. Rambam, we have a lot of these in Jewish tradition when it comes to people's names, particularly exalted people, not exonerated, exalted. Sorry. So when it comes to rabbis' names, when it comes to important people's names, you'll see a lot of these are turned into acronyms. So Rambam stands for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. We also know as either the Rambam in Hebrew or Maimonides, which comes through the Greek in the Middle Ages of his name. So if ever you want to know what it stood for, now you know. It's also written on street signs where the street is named Rambam or in another iteration after his name. Ramatkal. If you watch the news, you'll hear this word a lot, and it's used a lot, also written, Ramatkal. Ramatkal stands for Rosh Mate Klali, which is otherwise the chief of staff, and it's specifically referring to the IDF's chief of staff. You don't have a chief of staff in a organization called the Ramatkal, unless you're joking about how military-like their behavior and organization style is. Okay, it's usually only reserved for military terms. Another military, more security term, but important to know, it actually stands for something, is Shabak. Shabak is what we say in Hebrew as Sherut HaBitachon HaKlali. You might call this the Shabak, you might also call this the Shin Bet, standing for those first two letters of the three-letter acronym. The Shin Bet is the Internal Security Service of Israel. This is akin to the FBI in America. The Shin Bet, so it investigates crimes like the FBI would within Israeli society, as opposed to the Mossad, which is outside of Israel. Okay, but Shabak stands, or Shin Bet, as you'll also hear it, stands for Sherut HaBitachon HaKlali. Two more, and then I want to answer your questions. Shach. Shach is one you're not always going to hear, but it's a good one to know. It's, I don't want to say street Hebrew, but it's very everyday Hebrew. Certainly in some places you'll hear this. Instead of saying shekel, you'll say shach. And actually shach is more correct than shekel. Why? We've talked about this before when we talked about finances. In the 80s, Israel changed its currency. Israel was facing massive inflation, and it changed its currency from השקל הישראלי to השקל הישראלי החדש. Right, so you'll see this even to this day when you do conversion, that the shekel will either come up as ILS or NIS. ILS is the old version of the shekel, the Israeli shekel. NIS is the new Israeli shekel. And so shach is, you're using contemporary Israeli shekel, meaning the new shekel, since the 80s. That's what we call the formal name for Israel's currency is shekel chadash, shekel chadash Israeli. And we see this both in terms of its abbreviation, which is shach, shekel chadash, or shkalim chadashim, and that's how it will be written out if it's written out in letters. But even the symbol for the shekel, just like we have the dollar sign or the pound sign or the euro sign or the yen sign, is the letters shin and chet, right? So shin looks like this, and chet looks like this. You put it together and you get, as you see here in column B, row 39, that little squiggly thing means shkalim chadashim. If it's not written out shin gilshayim chet, you'll see that, and it indicates it's not just any shekel, it's the new shekel. It's what we currently use in the state of Israel as our currency. And finally, because I live here, because I'm broadcasting from here, is Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is oftentimes abbreviated as Taf Gilshaim Aleph. If you're talking to someone in chat or on an app or just in general, where do you live? Tet Ein Taf Gilshaim Aleph. Sometimes you'll say Ta. It's a little snooty to say Ta, just like it is in English, right? Ta. We don't say that. Simply know that Taf Gilshaim Aleph stands for Tel Aviv. Many other cities have this as well. So Ramat Gan is often abbreviated as Resh Gilshaim Gimel. Rishon LeZion is often abbreviated to Rashlatz. So the first few letters, the first three letters of Rishon and the second two letters of LeZion, Rashlatz. And so forth. Okay, so there are many, many more. The point I want to go through these today, and because this was not only requested as a topic, to go through some of the major ones, to go through what are the general laws and rules regarding creating acronyms, but also how often they're broken. This is a great example of it. Okay, and that website that's in the chat is very important. If ever you come across one and you want to make sure that you know what what it means, just plug it into that website. It'll give you um, what it stands for, its full name. Okay. All right. Let me stop here and ask some questions. Anonymous, can you write the name of the comedy team to learn slang? I will do that in the chat box because I can't write in the Q&A, but just so everyone can see this. Hagashash Achivel. I'll write it in transliteration. Hagashash Achivel. Very important, Hagashash Achivel, if you want to get a grasp on Israeli culture, even though this starts in the 50s and 60s through the 80s, really important comedy troupe. Highly recommend watching them and listening to them, even if you don't understand everything. A lot of slang that we use to this day is from there. Shoshana, I just saw that you write in the chat. Just scroll up in the chat. I'm not going to rewrite it. Sorry, I have to get to other questions. You'll see the website there. Okay. Diane, we're only talking about modern Hebrew, so I don't know about Aramaic. Anonymous uses the shin. I answered that question, Anonymous. We say sofash because it just sounds better. A lot of Hebrew, some of the answers will just boil down to aesthetics. It just sounds better. Diane, you're asking me a question that's not about modern Hebrew. You're asking me about reciting Torah. Yes, it is, but I don't want to answer it aloud because I don't want to confuse people. Folks, again, there are a lot of similarities between ancient Hebrew, classical Hebrew, and even Aramaic here, but we're only talking about modern Hebrew. I'll use them as reference points, but I only want to answer about modern Hebrew, but thank you for asking. Elisheva, what's the plural of gveret, gvirot? We talked about this the other week, like gvirotai verabotai, but you will not often hear this word. Gveret is a very old-fashioned word in Hebrew, just like addressing someone as madam in English is. So we don't use it very often. You use it as a sign of deference, but you're not going to use it very often. Okay. Carol, please repeat how afternoon is used, just like in English. That example that we have here, right, of, sorry, I just need to get the chat box closed. Right here in row 11, Afternoon is just like afternoon in English. If it's after noon, after 12 o'clock, you're going to use this until evening. So until 5 or 6. If you want to say shalosh achrei tzoraim and you just want to write that out, you can just write shalosh, the letter 3, the number 3, shalosh is 3, and then simply write Aleph, Chet, Hey, Gilshaim, Tzadi, and everyone will understand you mean 3 p.m. Instead of having to write out Achar Tzorayim, as you see here on the right-hand side. Okay. Do, 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 do. Okay, Phil asked, what about the acronym for Rosh Chodesh versus the acronym for street, Rechov? Great question, Phil. Let me just quickly write this in here in the spreadsheet since I have it open. I'll make it bigger, folks. Just give me 1 second as I'm doing this off the cuff. Okay, really quick. Sorry, just 1 second. There we go. Okay, really important, these 2 words, as Phil asks, right? Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, the first of the month in a Jewish calendar. We don't use this for the Gregorian calendar in Hebrew, this term, Rosh Chodesh. It has religious significance for observant Jews, will be usually abbreviated like this, row 42. Row 43, using the exact same letters, is Rechov. This is an abbreviation as opposed to an acronym. Rechov, Resh, Chet, Geresh, or sometimes just Resh, Geresh, stands for Rechov or street. So if you're on a certain street and it's simply written as Resh, Chet, Geresh, Dizengoff, you know you're on Rechov Dizengoff, not on Rosh Chodesh Dizengoff. Okay, great question. Lisa, why is tapuz not written with a double apostrophe? Great question. This word became so accepted in everyday Hebrew that it was no longer written with a double apostrophe. So to this day, it's simply dropped and it's used as its own word, which is why I like to use it as a beginning, because most people who are learning Hebrew aren't taught that it's actually an abbreviation. It's an acronym. Okay. I see a lot of people asking, what do you use instead of gveret? How do you address someone? Slicha, excuse me. But calling someone gveret is like calling someone ma'am or madam. Not so appropriate. Remember, Israeli society, despite me wearing a button-down shirt right now, is very casual, right? We're not going to use terms like Mr. and Mrs. and Sir and all of that on an everyday basis. Gveret is only going to be used in cases like law or very formal settings. Okay. May asks how to say good afternoon, Tzoraim tovim, or achar hatzoraim tovim, if you want to be really specific. Tzoraim tovim is the equivalent of how we say good afternoon, because we don't say in English good noon, but you don't have to say achar hatzoraim tovim. You can just say tzoraim tovim. Okay. Okay, one last time, because I see a lot of people asking. I'm going to write it in the spreadsheet, folks, so please don't say that I didn't share it again. The name of that website here, kizur.co.il, is your source for all things abbreviations and acronyms. Okay. All right, we're just at the top of the hour. I anyways need to go and rejoin this meeting around the corner. Thank you again for joining. Toda rabba, as we say in Hebrew. Thank you very much. You will get a copy of this lesson, including looking at the spreadsheet if you would like, on Nefesh B'Nefesh's YouTube channel. So it will be up in the next day or two. You'll be able to watch it. If you've written us in the chat window about any suggestions you have for topics, we'll get a recording of a transcript of it, but also please write to Nefesh B'Nefesh's emails email addresses if you have a specific request for a topic. Thank you again, Toda Rabah, for joining, and we will see you all next week. להתראות.